In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use Nextpeer's pushData API to implement a multiplayer attack feature in Pogmatch. So, with this feature in Pogmatch, a player can, upon successfully completing consecutive matches of cards, send an attack to all the other players that will end up randomly shaking cards in their deck to mess up their concentration. So as you can see here, I'm getting attacked by Cannoli, and two of my cards got messed up here. And as I play, and if the other player sends another attack, then two other cards are going to get shaken. So there are two functions that we need to be using from Nextpeer, the Nextpeer API. The first function is the push data to other players function that you can find in nextpeer.h. And the second function that we need to implement is in the np tournament delegate.h file, and it's the did receive tournament custom message method, which gets called back by Nextpeer when it receives messages from the other players. To send out the attack data, I'm going to implement a function in Game Manager to do that. So let's come to Game Manager. And I will create a function that's called push attack to other players. In this function, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to generate a rotation angle based on the number of consecutive matches that the player has achieved. Then we're going to take that angle and create an NS data with that angle and pass it to the Nextpeer push data method. Okay, so let's look at how we do the first one. This is not specific to Nextpeer, this is just basically what you want to do with the game. So for this example, I'm just going to generate an angle based on the number of consecutive matches divided by 6. And it's just arbitrary. And I don't want the angle to be larger than the largest angle, so I want to clamp it. And now my angle is going to be from pi over 2, from 0 to pi over 2. And it's going to be scaled by this factor, which is based on the number of consecutive matches. Now that we have the angle, I'm going to create an NS data chunk. So for this purpose, I'm going to be using the NS property list serialization class to do that. Okay. Now before we do that, there are several things that I need to declare here. So I need to declare an error object, error pointer, and then I need to take the angle here and create an NS number for it. Okay. Now we're going to create the NS data chunk, outward data, and I'm going to be calling property list serialization for this, using this data with property list creator and passing it the angle number. For format, in my case, I'm just going to pick the binary format. Options, there's none. And then for error, let's give it this error class. Okay, now we have the outward data. Now let's call Nextpeer and ask it to push this data to the other players. Also add this function to the declaration of Game Manager over here in the .h file. Now call the push attack function whenever the player receives new multiplier. Do a global search for multiplier up to find where that happens. As you can see, there are two places in Game View Controller that shows this message. The first one happens when the player completes a round, and the second one happens when the player achieves more than one consecutive matches. So let's call our push attack function here. First check that the game mode is multiplayer. And then we'll call the push attack function over here. So when you play the game and get a multiplier reward, go look in the debugger console to verify that Nextpeer is printing out that it has sent out the custom data. Next, I'm going to implement the receiver code. First, I'm going to change the game manager to adopt the NP tournament delegate. So include the NP tournament delegate header file and then adopt the protocol. Then implement the did receive custom message function. And add a placeholder code in here. Then we need to pass this into the initialize function so that Nextpeer knows that there's a tournament delegate that it needs to call back to. So to do that, let's go to app delegate here and then find where we create the delegates container and add an additional delegate to it. So in this case, we want to add a tournament delegate and give it also the game manager instance. To verify that the game is receiving messages from the other players, I'm going to start two instances of the Pogmatch game, one on my iPod Touch and the other one on the simulator here. So here my iPod Touch just sent an attack message to the simulator, and in the debugger console you see that the Nextpeer delegate has received the custom data and it's printed it out. And also our function printed out did receive custom message down here. Inside the receiver function, I'm going to do three things here. First, I'm going to decode the angle value from the data chunk, and then I'm going to save off the attacker's name so that we can display it later and inform the game that it has been attacked. Now let's look at how we do each of these. To decode the angle value, we need to get the blind data chunk out of the message. So there's a property here from the message called message, and this is the message data chunk. Check if message data is not null. Now I'm going to call ns property list serialization to get the float number, which is the angle data, out of the message data chunk. I'm going to call the property list with data creator, passing it the message data. For options, I'm going to pass in property list immutable. Format, I'm going to pass it a null because I don't need the return value, and here the error return value. So after that, I'm going to retrieve the angle out of this NS number and save it into this last attack angle variable in Game Manager. Now I'm going to also add a default value just in case there's no data coming in. For the attacker's name, I'm going to assign it to the last attacker name property in Game Manager, and the attacker's name is simply the player name from the message. Finally, I'm going to inform the game of this attack by incrementing the attack counter here. Add a new function to Game Manager to return whether the game has been attacked. I'm going to call it has been attacked. So basically there are two counters that that Game Manager uses to track whether an attack has happened. There's a counter that gets incremented every time a message gets received, and then there's a counter that gets changed every time an attack has been returned to the caller. So in this case, if these two get out of sync, then we have been attacked. And I'm going to sync up these two counters here, then return a true from this function. So in GameView controller, I'm going to add a new function called handle multiplayer attack. And then this function, it's going to call the Game Manager and only process do stuff here when the Game Manager has detected an attack. So let's look at the handling function here. So whenever it's attacked, it's going to show a banner saying that it's been attacked, and then it's going to use the last attacker's name to show that the attack is from so-and-so. Then it randomly selects two cards from the current active cards in the deck, and then it uses the last attack angle to determine the range of the shake that each of these cards will be shaken. So this is the function that actually shakes the card, and using the shake range. So now we have this function basically that would handle a particular attack and show it to the player. Now we need to call it every frame in the game loop. So to do that, let's come in here to the update function in the game loop. Okay. Let's find the game state in progress. Check we're in multiplayer, and then call handle multiplayer attacks. So finally, this for loop here performs per frame animation update to process the shaking animation for each of the cards. Now build the game, and that's it. This concludes our tutorial.